For coming. Again, feel free to get snacks throughout. So I'm gonna introduce our speaker. Stanley, I actually don't know how to pronounce your name.
Ulijaszek.
Ulijaszek is a nutritional anthropologist whose work centers on the evolutionary basis for and cultural diversity in nutritional health. This includes both undernutrition and obesity and the diseases associated with them. He has carried out research in India, Nepal, Sarawak, Bangladesh, Papua New Guinea, Cook Islands, Poland, Italy, and Australia. He is the director of the Unit for Biocultural Variation and Obesity. And we are so honored today that he will be discussing ultra-processed food for the Oxford Critical Food Studies Network. So thanks for coming, and up to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. And it's great that there is this new grouping, this new formation. It's fantastic. From some background, I'm now emeritus professor because you have to retire at the age of 68 years in this university. I'm still going. I'm on my third book since retiring. Just, you wake up in the morning and you only concentrate on the thing you want to concentrate on. That is so nice. And other books in the pipeline. So I still retain a small room in the department, in the anthropology department. I'm still emeritus professor of my college, and it's still very active working with various people. So the issue of ultra-processed food has kind of crept up across the years in relation to the work that I do, often in relation to sort of evolutionary basis for sort of human appetite and taste, and the kinds of the engineering of foods now for particular kinds of palates. And that's become very, very clear. To me, the perfect example of an engineered ultra-processed food is the Pringle. And if you next time you put a Pringle in your mouth, no, even before you get that, from the time that you look at the packet, just go through the process of what it's doing to your brain while you're looking at that packet of Pringles, and then you open the box, and then there's this thing that you put on your tongue, and it's nicely shaped, so it sits on your tongue perfectly, so it hits all the taste receptors relatively evenly, and then it crunches, and so it's then creating other sensations in your brain, how you consume it, and of course, it doesn't satisfy your appetite, so you want another one, then you want another one, and don't stop until you pop. Okay, whatever that means is the kind of current adverb that I'm aware of. So ultra-processed foods. I'm trying to think, am I moving the right way? Which one do I press?
The right button, but you might have to click the screen and then. Okay, that's it.
Sorry.
No, you're okay.
Only got defill and everything else because we've got non-continuous. There you go. Fantastic. Look, it's ultra-processed foods. We seem to be surrounded by them. This is just a Canadian sitcom set in a convenience store. You look at the shelves, and there's lots of things that you can probably work out versions of from wherever you are. There's lots of sweet things in front of this guy. There's lots of savory things on the shelf, and you kind of know what they are. They used to call them junk food, and the word junk food was kind of sometimes related to the fact that these things seem to be addictive. When you consume them, you want to consume more of them, and so they're an ideal vehicle for good profit in the food market. And these things are relatively cheap to produce. They have very high profit margins. So, and some of them are almost indestructible. Probably aren't destructible, but I mean, if you leave them on a shelf, they can sit there for a long time. So I've seen ultra-processed foods in the Cook Islands. I've seen them in the centre of Australia. I've seen them in remotest places. They'll be sitting on the shelf, and they might have been sitting there for 6 months, but they're still there on sale. So places where you think it ought to be a food paradise, often it's not. And Papua New Guinea as well, remote places in Papua New Guinea. So I'm going to frame ultra-processed foods from an anthropological perspective and say, well, we can hammer away at the public health aspects of this, but let's put some kind of framing on what it is, what ultra-processed foods do in relation to food as we know it, outside of this context. So from an anthropological perspective, Food is more than nutrition. It includes health and well-being, cultural boundaries that surround food, all things you're probably very aware of, being a food group. Social organization, material cultures that surround food. If you're a subsistence farmer, for example, all the material cultures surround food production. You can include the material culture that surrounds irrigation, for example, as in places like Nepal with required irrigation. Food is also tied to identity. In Nepal, working among the Gurung, when you're walking from one place to another, people say, you know, where have you come from and where are you going? That's the first question. Then there'll be another question, have you eaten? Yes, have you eaten rice is the next question. If you've eaten rice, you're in a good place. And so people, you know, are happy to be able to do that. So identity through, you know, the staple food that people consume in eating at places. And there are environmental connections and economic systems. People trade food, people grow food. This influences the environment for good or bad. So, and then related to that are food systems in both broad and narrow senses. The local food systems in many places can be further defined in relation to what is grown and what is moved around. But also in broad senses, you could look at the food system in Oxford. You could even just go think about the food system as it relates to the shops that you go and buy your food. How local is it? How far does food travel? How much of it travels around the planet? I had a colleague come from Lund in Sweden, and she was working with me on a project, and she said, you know, I buy my industrial food at Waitrose, she said, and I buy my real food in a small store, and immediately see this class system of supermarkets that you see in the UK, whether it be, you know, Morrison's up to Waitrose and Marks and Spencer's. She just destroyed the class system that surrounds supermarkets in the UK by saying actually nearly everything in those stores is industrial in one way or another. It's the branding and sometimes the specific ingredients that change it from being more industrial or less industrial. So I'm going to talk, my brief as far as I know it is to talk until 6 o'clock.
Yeah, but up to you, but yes.
Oh, no, I'm going to stay to, I don't want to overstay my welcome. So if I slip some slides, it's because I want to try and keep to time. So there's plenty of time for questions. So what are they, ultra-processed foods for starters? Something that we could be quite clear about: foods high in fats and oils, refined carbohydrates and sugar. Sugar is a refined carbohydrate. I would also argue that sugar is a chemical, and therefore really, because it's been used historically, we give it a special category, but actually what it does in the body isn't actually terribly good. We've just naturalized its use in so many different ways. And there's alchemy that goes with sugar as well, that you can turn it into so many different things. And, you know, you can caramelize it, you can put it on a cake and it will do one thing. You could put it into a preserve or a jam and it will transform fruit and transform flavor. So there's alchemy to sugar that's particularly intriguing to bakers, especially. And I'm all for it. I love my sugar. But there are limits. So in addition to this, there's a wide range of possible additives for preservation, for long shelf life, also for taste and palatability. So taste and palatability, and I'm not going to get into this, but I've written about the ecology, taste as ecological sensing with colleagues in Bologna in Italy, where the research is about biochemistry. My first degree is in biochemistry. And it's about the physiology of taste. What kinds of taste receptors do people have, and how they're expressed, and so on. That we have, there's variation in taste receptors. Some people can taste bitterness more than other people can taste bitterness, for example. Some people taste sweetness more than other people. The number of receptors that we have is related to the evolutionary principles as well. But in the manufacture of many ultra-processed foods, you have the engineering of foods for palatability, so they're related to perceptions of taste. and flavor. And these sometimes it's not natural taste and flavor, it's chemicals that are made to mimic other kinds of tastes. So there's something called the Monell Sensory Something Center in Philadelphia that produces chemicals for the food industry. So when it says strawberry flavor on something, it's probably a chemical. If it says strawberry flavored, it's probably strawberry extract of some kind. Those little tweaking or messing around with words is very important. It's different in every country. What can be gotten away with? The film about McDonald's way back in the day, you've seen that movie. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but in that movie, there's a scene where a guy says you can make your milkshakes cheaper if you use strawberry flavor, which is chemicals, instead of strawberries. And I think they said no at that stage, but I'm not sure that's still the case. So you can lower the bottom line, and you can lower the cost and maximize productivity, economic productivity through cheapening your ingredients. So one element of ultra-processed foods, as I see it, is it's a race to the bottom in terms of food quality, and there's huge competition among corporations to maximize profitability on things that are very cheap to produce, and maximize profitability in ways that stays legal, stays within the law, but they're competing against each other. And so it's not a surprise that this is in place. I mean, there's other things going on as well, and I'm going to come to that at the very end in terms of what's currently happening in terms of ultra-processed foods. So how can you identify an ultra-processed foods? Well, food substances of exclusive industrial use, things that you wouldn't find in your kitchen. Well, you might. Protein isolates, whey protein. My son's home at the moment, and he's got a packet of whey protein in the kitchen. Okay, he's making sure he gets his protein, and that seems to be what a 25-year-old wants to do. That's what he's doing. He's drinking milk and putting whey protein into his milk to bulk up his protein, so he gets the most out of going to the gym. Good for him. I would do it. That's what he's doing. That's okay. And I love my son. There are things like high fructose corn syrup, which is a enrichment of corn syrup through industrial processes where they process corn, maize, which turns it into a hydrolyze, turns it into a sugar, and it's called high fructose because it's got an enrichment of this particular sugar form. So the sugar that we have as sucrose is glucose and fructose, two different kinds of carbohydrates that are linked together. I'm sure there's somebody here with some biochemistry, but I'm not expecting any biochemistry from anybody. So imagine two molecules linked together. That makes a particular sweet molecule. Take fructose on its own, it's sweeter than those two things combined. It's just that in nature, when you process sugar beet or sugar cane, you come out with sucrose, which is those two molecules together. Fructose is particularly sweet. It's also particularly risky in terms of metabolic health because it bypasses one particular rate limiting step in your metabolism. So you can get an insulin spike with fructose that you don't quite get with sucrose. Therefore, it's the risk of it predisposing to diabetes, to depositing fat around the trunk, all kinds of negative health indicators associated with it. And yet, in the United States, it is very big business indeed. This is the major sugar in the diet of citizens in the United States. So if you're going to compare an ultra-processed food in the UK and in the United States, one bit, and they're sweet, let's say cookies. In the UK, they're more likely to use sugar. That's historical. So it's this country that's it's ridden on the back of slavery and is ridden on the back of sugar production. It's taken the idea of sugar production from India, taken it to the Caribbean, and created an empire out slavery and dependency around the production of sugar. So the sugar lobby in this country is still extraordinarily strong. Whereas in the this country doesn't need high fructose corn syrup, it's plenty of sugar of its own. Whereas other countries, the United States, mostly producing sugar through refining maize, through refining corn. Okay, so there are also cosmetic additives. I've mentioned them: flavors, flavor enhancers, colors, emulsifiers, sweeteners, foaming agents, bulking agents, blah, 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 carbonating agents. What would Coca-Cola be without its fizz? Have you ever tried to drink stale Coca-Cola? Anybody? No, it's beneath you. I know it's beneath you. You wouldn't want to, really. It's it's basically sweetened, caramelized, carbonated water. But put those together in a particular way, and suddenly there's a taste. There's a taste associated with the carbonate. But from fizzy water tastes different to still water, and that's because we have taste receptors that can detect that carbonation, for example. Okay, so in broader context, ultra-processed foods are rapidly changing and growing. They're building on existing categories of processed foods. Now, some of this, production has a deep history. People have been salting herrings in Northern Europe for thousands of years. Certainly in large scale for maybe 1,000 years. People have been making conserves, jams, and so on ever since sugar became relatively cheap on the market in the 19th century. So we have categories of processed foods which we have some nostalgic view towards, but we wouldn't call them ultra-processed foods. They might be, because they fit a kind of nostalgic category as well. Also, they're normalized in terms of everyday diet. So some of the components of processed foods are key to ultra-processed foods. So sugar, for example, you might say, well, sugar in marmalade is okay. You're taking a smear of marmalade on your bread every day. Okay, well, so what? What about if you suddenly consume 10 times as much of that sugar in one go? Because there are foods that are ramping up the amount of sugar that's in your particular foods. In the US, a lot of so-called savory foods have got high fructose corn syrup in them because it makes things palatable. Burger buns, for example, have just that amount of sugar in them, high fructose corn syrup in them, just enough so it tastes better. You don't even know why. Don't even realize it's just below the sweet taste threshold, but it's above the activation threshold for those receptors. So it's an insidious kind of game that's being played. So most ultra-processed foods are industrial products. I've said that. In historical context for ultra-processed foods is something that a sociologist called Georgi Skinis has talked about as nutritionism, and identify some kinds of nutritionism. So, for example, cornflakes, they're fortified with vitamins and so on, and iron. That sounds great. But first of all, you smash it to bits and you get rid of a lot of what's in there, and then you fortify it. You don't talk about what you've gotten rid of, you talk about what you put into it. Similarly, in the 1950s, 1960s in the US, you had vitamin donuts, fortifying donuts with 25 units of vitamin B1. Again, the processing of the flour in making donuts and deep frying donuts would have lost a lot of those vitamins that they put back in. And so you advertise what you put back in rather than what you've taken out. And the current one, as far as I can see it, is Huel, and Huel is a complete meal replacement. And you see it more and more in shops and supermarkets. There's a machine at Heathrow. If you're really in a hurry and you need to have your meal before you get on a plane, get a bottle of Huel, take it with you on the plane. It's supposed to have everything that you possibly need. If you are simply far too busy to actually eat or even buy a sandwich. So what does nutritionism do? The history of this is the reduction of food to nutrients. This history starts in the 19th century with the discovery of the calorie. And the calorie is a standard unit of energy, And there are lots of calories being produced from the sun, coming down from the sun, and anybody sitting in the sun's rays at the moment is absorbing those calories. The rest of us are not, because you're getting some radiant sun from radiant rays from the sun. So the calorie is a universal unit of exchange of energy. When you take those calories and say, what is food and what kind of energy do humans need, reducing it to calories, so well, human needs calories maybe around 2,000 a day. And then where do you get those calories from? There's a little bit of nutrition here. Protein, fat, and carbohydrate all contain calories. All are so-called macronutrients, big nutrients, and an amazing scholar called Wilbur Atwater in 1899 wrote a paper about the interchangeability of these macronutrients in terms of calories. So the present day, we know that if a food contains a gram of fat, a gram of protein, a gram of carbohydrate, it will have 4 calories from the carbohydrate, 4 calories from the protein, and 9 calories from the fat. So altogether, 17 calories. If you know the composition of the food, you can know the calories pretty exactly. And that, in the 19th century, that was a great idea. Early 20th century, even better. The place it was first recruited was actually towards sports nutrition. In the United States, sort of scientific nutrition towards improving the performance of Olympian athletes had incredible payoff in the St. Louis Olympics. Incredible payoff. The Americans won most of the medals. Seriously. By the time the next Olympics rolled around, everybody was onto it. Everybody was onto scientific nutrition. So knowing that you need protein, carbohydrate, and fat, and knowing the interchangeability allows you to suddenly dissect foods in very different ways. So don't eat that banana, that's just got carbohydrate. Actually, you need more protein, so maybe you should drink more milk or eat more cheese, those kinds of things. So the nutritionism is reducing foods to nutrients, and the principal one is calories. This could do a lot of work and has done across the century. It sets minimum standards for population consumption of calories, and then later on, when they found vitamins for micronutrients as well, for vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin B, 1, 2, 3, etc. And so you could set up minimum standards for what you should be eating at the individual level, at the population level. So ramp that up to the population level, and you can regulate state level food production. So, well, how many calories do our people need? Okay, let's say on average 2,000 a day. That's not exactly the right number, but you say, well, let's multiply that by the population of Russia, Ukraine, UK, France, whichever country you happen to be governing, and say, this is how much food we need to be able to feed our population. Very rough numbers, because children and adults are different, but to give you an average number and to give you a way of tracking food security in the country. It also allows the relationships between nutrition and health to be and disease to be elucidated, and also at the largest level across the last since 1961. It's allowed the regulation of global food security. The countries that report it, you can see which countries are getting fewer calories, which countries are getting more calories. Regrettably, the story is always Africa gets the fewest calories in recent decades. There was a time when I was a child, people said, well, think about the starving children in India. Think about the starving children in Asia. It's the worst kind of blackmail any parent can do to their child. That you must eat everything because there are children starving somewhere else. Well, the starving in India are less starving. Things are changing. The starving in East Asia are less starving. Things are changing until recently. And I'll come on to this presently. So in defining ultra-processed foods, the NOVA classification first came from Brazil. And the principal author, Carlos Monteiro, top nutritionist in Brazil. And the great thing about Brazil is its ability to be less aligned to various countries in relation to its policies. In relation to food policy, the country is big enough to say that we can set our own standards. When they set up their own idea of what food security was in Brazil, one of the issues was about commensality, eating together, the importance of community, the importance of sociality in eating, and not just here's nutrients, here's people. You two will get on fine, but actually there's a whole set of other things that go on in between. So this commensality of having food and sharing would be, is part of nutritional requirements in Brazil. But coming from Brazil, they're able to do things that other countries have struggled to do. The US, the government would struggle to be able to say anything against the food corporations. Similar things have been true in the UK. UK has got a tax on sugar-sweetened beverages, but the UK government did not believe the modelling that was done actually here in Oxford in relation to the impacts of taxing sugar-sweetened beverages on health until they got real data from Mexico. Because Mexico is another country that was happy to go ahead and do something that seemed to be unthinkable in the global north. Big countries of the global south that are emerging economies are able to take the lead on some of these things, and that is something to be totally aware of. Anyway, the NOVA food classification, you got it in front of you. The one thing that you might look out for is the NOVA 4, the fourth one along, is ultra-processed foods. This started in 2009. We said unprocessed or minimally processed foods. These are all things you can know, you can recognize them. You can recognize a chicken when you see it. You can recognize a piece of maize when you see it. Recognize a pineapple and a tomato when you see it. Also, because of history, processed culinary ingredients, NOVA 2, salt, sugar, vegetable oils, butter, other fats, we can all recognize those. Then we have a range of things that are more traditionally processed, and at the other extreme, we have the ultra-processed foods that include things like shakes, burgers, all the things that we know about. Okay, some highlighted points from how ultra-processed foods have evolved, and I'll just go through this briefly. Basically, the majority substances extracted from whole foods, which either no or relatively small amounts of minimally processed foods have been added, plus salt and other preservatives and cosmetic additives. Ultra-processed foods are designed to be convenient, palatable, ready to eat or ready to heat food products to replace home-prepared dishes. 2012, you add something new to this, which is not recognized. Ultra-processed foods not recognized as versions of existing foods. You get new things emerging on the market that your grandmother would not recognize, maybe even your mother would not recognize, because you can. They're designed to be eaten by themselves or in combination of snacks or drinks. Snacks, that's another category. Many countries have a tradition of snacks. I've come to think about India, for example. There's a strong, a very deep tradition of snacks. Many countries don't. When you introduce the category of snacking, you can change food systems. For example, in Japan, you don't snack. You wait for a meal. Who's been to Japan? People, I'm sure you're very polite people and eat properly. But if you're eating on the street, it's this happened to me somewhere. You're dead. Just with that one. You disappoint me. Honestly, you don't know how to eat. You're eating like a savage. Snacks are another category. When you introduce them, it's another category where you can put lots of ultra-processed foods in. Where it's a novel category, really, it's open season. You can put all kinds of things into that and say, it's tasty, it's good, it fills the gap, it blah, 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 all kind of rubbish in terms of what that might be. There's other kinds of products in there that might be a little bit worrying. In 2015, they added laboratory-based organic materials such as oil and coal, colorants, flavor enhancers that are extracted from the oil industry. See, it gets a bit worrying. Of course, you have to test all of these things, but how do you really know? Nothing is really tested to destruction. So there's sort of many things that are this categorization continues to evolve. I'm going to skip this. Health and well-being. Okay. Ultra-processed food consumption is associated with weight gain, with obesity, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and all-cause mortality. That is death due to all causes. Okay, that's just an epidemiological category. So associations with things like cancer and hypertension, they're indicative, but actually the studies haven't been big enough to be able to say definitively they are related. What is interesting is in this chart that shows the relationship between the percentage of ultra-processed foods that somebody eats, so this is 250,000 people, and relating their diet to ultimate death, shows that there's a very clear and steady relationship. The more ultra-processed food you consume, the more likely you are to die. And if you can look at the chart, I don't really feel like I can walk around. Can't sit forever. Is that line something? That's relative risk. That means if that's 1, that's the average of the population. When this relative risk goes up to 2, it means your chance of dying is 20% higher. Okay. In the United States, something like 55% of the diet comes from ultra-processed foods. So it means the additional risk of death is about 15% above the average for those people that consume ultra-processed foods. It also means for those 50% or so who don't consume less ultra-processed foods, they are below that line. So you can see that given that there is a socioeconomic relationship as well, poorer people eating more ultra-processed foods have much higher risk of these chronic diseases. So this is the biggest study of this kind that's been done so far. It's showing clear and strong relationships between consumption of ultra-processed foods. So you have to rely on these big studies that epidemiologists do to be able to say, yes, it's like that, if these things are to be counted. The consumption of ultra-processed foods, they dominate American supermarkets. So this is just a slide that shows ultra-processed foods with a number of different markers. So what that means is they've got more of these different chemicals. One marker means very few additional chemicals, 4 UPF markers, 4 or more different chemicals. And we can see that when we get up to 4 or more, that Walmart, Target have very much more UPF markers than Whole Foods, which claims to be natural. Moving on, then, let's think about cultural values. In this nice picture about nutrition transition, an epidemiologist called Barry Popkin developed an idea, a construct called the nutrition transition, which suggested that humans have gone from being hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists, to being modernized people, increasingly urbanized, increasingly consuming the wrong kinds of foods. But then there'll be a day of enlightenment when everything comes good, everybody's educated, everybody eats the right thing. I'm not sure that is going to happen in Popkin's lifetime, given he is older than me. So I can't see it happening in Popkin's lifetime, necessarily in my lifetime either. But the basis for nutrition transition is not a neutral one. There are all kinds of things that have happened to make the nutrition transition happen in many places, moving from traditional diets where everything is natural to diets where people are consuming all of these things I've already mentioned, require some significant cultural changes. And these cultural changes are often colonial dynamics. So, for example, in Senegal, you can get very good plenty bread. In the Cook Islands, you can get very good fish and chips. What does that tell you? Well, okay, the French were in Senegal and the British were in the Cook Islands, and they changed their diets. Could probably get a very good Victoria sponge in Kenya. Because, by moving around the world, by colonizing different countries, you're not just colonizing people's bodies and minds and souls, you're colonizing their food systems as well and changing them towards the dominant cultures, colonial cultures food system. So there are changes in nutritional profiles because these cultural changes are based on the particular changing dietary cultures in the countries of the colonizer, shall we say. So in the Cook Islands, we wrote a paper. I worked in the Cook Islands, and one of my students worked in Nauru, and we wrote a paper. And the Daily Telegraph in this country said, British destroyed Pacific Islanders' diets with fish and chips, something like that. And I thought, okay, well, it wasn't exactly like that. But before that, they used to eat raw fish. They used to be a very much more healthier way of doing things. They introduced oil, imports of sugar, imports of oil, imports of refined carbohydrates. In the United States, the Gila River people, Pima, the Gila River, in Arizona, and Arizona, yeah. When they dammed the Gila River and cut off their water supply, they really destroyed their local food system. And by destroying and then so they started bringing in rations, which were colonial rations, really. What do you think? White flour, sugar, usual things. You find that in Australia as well. Those rations are supposed to be saving people, but they're actually creating a palate for these particular kinds of foods, which persist to the present day, in the present day guise of ultra-processed foods. So these things all matter. Okay, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, they have global outreach. McDonald's are most recently creating new franchises as in settlements in South Africa. They're not focusing on the cities so much as it's focusing on the places where people are finding status in having these new things. And not necessarily in the places where people have money, not among the middle classes, but among the people who have just enough income to find status in these particular foods. The same goes for Coca-Cola. In terms of traditional food, down at the bottom, we've got tradition. And there we've got unprocessed foods, and then culinary and kitchen processing. And what two sectors, the formal commercial sector, but also at home. So this is tradition. But then as you go up this chain, you've got minimally processed foods, culinary ingredients, food industry ingredients, food processing. Do most of you cook? That's the leading question. Who likes cooking? Love it. But the great thing about cooking is you've got control of your ingredients. That is absolutely the number one thing. Because you don't know what's going into your body if you go to a store and buy it. All you know is that it will be rock bottom ingredients as far as possible to maximize maximize profitability. So cooking is something that gives you control over what you do and control over what you eat. And you can change things. And of course, if you go through this process with this slide, you say, what am I eating? There's some minimally processed foods. You'll have some culinary ingredients that come from somewhere. Look at what's on the bottle. Where does that somewhere? Where does that soy come from? Where does that salt come from? Salt. Well, we've got a long history of knowing what salt is. Decide what you're going to use. Got that option. You probably can't afford. Some of you can afford really good olive oil, I'm sure. My stage in life, I have the luxury of having really good olive oil, and I'm enjoying it. I'm 70 years old. I've earned it. As long as you know what it tastes like, That's an important thing, because the time will come when you won't be able to just take this magic ingredient and be able to put it into your food. Just displacing cheap oil with stuff that is actually good for your body makes a huge difference. And at the far end, we have ultra processed food products, which is, you know, the end of the food chain, very profitable, and people like and consume, but actually isn't terribly helpful for them. Thinking about the cultural values, and this is a study that's carried out in Canada, and it shows, if you look at the blue chart, the blue bars are 2015, the pink bars are 2004, showing that ultra-processed food consumption in Canada has actually been going down. You know, they've been, you know, the US, most other places going up. In Canada, they're doing lots of good things. And if you look at the bar on the your far right-hand side, we have Indigenous Canadians who seem to be consuming the highest amounts of ultra-processed foods of all Canadians. Lowest consumption people from Asia are more likely to be cooking with the basic ingredients. Can I just say, I'm very happy for you to share the slides. I'm very happy for everybody to have the slides. Use them as you will. And if you use them in a presentation, it would be great if you can just give me a credit, verbal. That would be fantastic. If you forget, I'm sure that as well. But, you know, it's there to be shared. It's there to be used. So please.
Share them, yeah.
If people want them, then they can use them. Okay. The other thing about, ultra processed foods and cultural values. If you go to Coca-Cola recipes on the web, you're going to find all kinds of stuff, especially Mexican. Coca-Cola is indigenized in Mexico to the extent, I'm sure you know this, that Mexican Coca-Cola to a Mexican is much nicer than Coca-Cola in the United States. Different sugar. They use cane sugar in Mexico and use high fructose corn syrup in the United States. It has a different taste, but people know that taste, even though it's quite a subtle one. It's actually less sweet, but they say it's, you know, they can tell. So this is Mexican Coca-Cola is a special thing. Indigenized recipes in Cook Islands. If you want to take food for a feast, and in Auckland, New Zealand, then you take a big bucket of KFC from Auckland Airport, take it on the plane back home. So you can have a feast with KFC, real deal, as opposed to yams or sweet potatoes or anything that's much more traditional. In this picture, we've got cola braised brisket tacos. Okay, so using Coca-Cola as a marinade. It's how you indigenize foods, is by replacing these things, replacing these ingredients. And then somebody said, "Oh, you can't use ordinary Mexican cola. You've got to use Coca-Cola, etc., to get the real taste and so on." There's a picture here about junk food health facts for Aboriginal people in Australia. About 16 teaspoons of sugar in a soft drink. 1 meat pie is 3 serves of junk food, 4 teaspoons of fat. If you go to some Indigenous Australian outstations, this is most of the food that you can get. 58 cents of every food dollar in Indigenous Australia spent on junk food and drink. Most of people's income spent on ultra-processed foods in Indigenous communities. Huge. And if you try and get fruit and vegetables into some remote places, it's actually very difficult because you have to get them, you have to fly them in, and then they've got a very short shelf life, and it's difficult to maintain. The profit margin on it's small, and so there's all those issues. So you need to have Indigenous systems of agriculture to be able to sustain healthy living. It is happening. It is happening. But you know, it's at the beck and call of the major corporations. So down at the bottom here, we've got an individual who's taking native Canadian, who's taking KFC to a feast and doing a dance in this particular video. He's kind of parodying the idea of taking KFC to to a feast. So there's all kinds of ways in which people make ultra processed foods indigenous through integrating them into their food systems, especially through things like their ceremonial feasts or rituals as they go. So social organization. Food is a resource for social reproduction through health and biology, and it's related to social reproduction work through acquisition, preparation, and so on. And ultra-processed foods are being integrated into existing diets and food practices, transforming these systems. Outside of this, you also have precarious and gig economy work, which grow with working poverty, and this leads to shifts in the ways that people use time and space. And so ultra-processed foods are creating new trade-offs in organizing everyday life. So I come home and they're not going to, decide what I'm going to eat. In my household, we usually talk about what we're going to have to eat in the morning and then work out what we're going to do. And oftentimes I will come down in the morning and be just thinking about supper already. It's nice. If I'm cooking, it's nice to think about what I'm going to be cooking that evening. It gives me something to anticipate, and it gives me some pleasure in working out what I've got, what I need. And it's an improvisatory pleasure as well. So let's work with what you've got. Also, ultra-processed foods do away with the idea that you have to cook with leftovers. So if you cook too much and you have something left over, what do you do with it the next day? You could heat it up, or you can do something else with it. You can, you then have to think, well, how do I deal with the food that's left over? With ultra-processed foods, you don't have that. So you're creating a kind of cooking poverty as well. So you're unempowering, disempowering people in a different way. Also, I have relatives in Chicago, and I've been there once. They're lovely. They are delightful people. And I remember being there one evening, everybody had come back from work, and they were saying, what shall we have? There were like 5 people, plus myself and my son, all deciding on different things. And then they go out and buy these different things in a common place. So everybody's sitting at the table, eating different things. And I'm thinking to myself, the company's fantastic, but I could do better myself. I really can do a lot better myself. If I had the resources, but I'm not going to educate them. It's not for me. It's patronizing people. You don't do that. So just that coming together at the end of the day and saying, what shall we eat? Oh, don't know. Okay, pizza. The other thing about deciding what you're going to eat at the end of the day is that you're already tired, stressed, not thinking clearly, and you're already craving ultra-processed foods. You're craving palatability. And if for example, who's come off a long flight and gone straight for the ultra-processed food? Anybody? Me? Come on, guys. Come on. And you're intelligent people, and you know what it's doing to your body. And you know what, you've been on a plane, you've had all that white noise, you're stressed, your cortisol levels are high, and you're susceptible to consuming the wrong foods because you're already predisposed to find pleasure in food. And you want to do something that's going to overwhelm that stress response that you had from coming off a plane. I had the best response in Sydney a long time ago. I said, I just want to buy a salad. I was at Sydney Airport, just transferring off a plane from the UK and going on to Canberra in Australia. And I said to somebody, where can I get a salad? And this lovely lady said, about your age, most of you. She said, we used to do salad, now we have to sell this crap, she said. It's very great. Ultra-processed food industry relies on nutritionism, single nutrient science, rather than the configuration of what food is in social reproduction, and emphasizes convenience of saying this end of the day, yes, you can have it, of course you can have it, but what are you not having by having that? In terms of nutrition transition, and ultra-processed food. These two slides on your left-hand side, I took in Calcutta a few years ago. And this is, these are street traders, and every day people come in and they bring in food from market. Honestly, how do you feed a city of millions of people every day with fresh food? It is one of the miracles of India that they're able to supply an entire city with fresh food every day. When you look on the other side, you have a supermarket and you've got packaged fruit. As soon as you package fruit, you've got to think about the shelf life. You have to pick it early. You have to stick it behind plastic. You've got to dispose of the waste. You've increased the food miles. You've created all kinds of problems for the sake of being modern by so doing. Similarly, you put something in a jar or a tin, you carry it around the world, and it can be, can sit in that tin for years before it sells. And that's why you see these things in some of the remote places of the world. The other thing that ultra-processed foods do is change eating patterns. So how you consume, what you consume also changes. The idea of going to a fast food place and learning to eat quickly. You might have a particular social context for eating and eating quickly, but this changes it completely. If you have the bright decor and music, uncomfortable seats, and push you through a place very quickly, and you're going to eat very quickly. And not just that, but most ultra-processed foods will not satisfy your hunger immediately. And so, but you're eating faster than your appetite can be assuaged. So by the time you've had enough to eat, you've overeaten, because you overshoot for that. If you eat a slow meal, for example, you're more likely to eat what your physiological needs are, because all the time you're eating, what's going into your stomach, you're digesting it, it's sending back signals to your brain, and as it does that, across a period of time, you get to a point where you say, I've had enough. And usually it's close to what you need, unless you're feasting or somebody says you need to have a dessert and you don't really want a dessert, which happens too. But eating slowly gives you a particular, gives you an appropriate satisfaction response to the food you're eating in a slow manner. Okay, and where it's 5 to 6, I'm going to race on with a few things very quickly. Okay, it's going to get a lot messier with lots more pictures. Will you allow me to go faster? Yeah. Okay, Barbara Kruger, American artist who wrote, after Descartes, I shop, therefore I am. Descartes didn't say that, he said, I think, therefore I am. That is, she's pointing out that, humans are being defined by consumerism. Ultra-processed foods in relation to identity, consumer selfhood, that, we are creating ourselves through what we consume, through what we dress, through what we eat. And so we create our own identities. And, I can just look across this room and see so many different forged identities on the basis of what you guys are wearing, the kind of haircuts you've got, stuff like that. It's not bad. It's just what it is. It's fine. I mean, we check on this every day. But marketing of ultra-processed foods is a molding of consumer consciousness. You look at McDonald's, Subway, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, all of these different organizations, but different market reach, but they all are pursuing brand value. The golden arches at McDonald's, if you're on a freeway, you see them from the distance. And if you like McDonald's, you're already eating that burger before you've gotten to where you buy the burger. In your head, you're eating that burger. By the time you get there, you've already decided what you're going to have. You've already modeled in your mind what you're going to have. And because of the standardization of this particular product, it's going to be the same everywhere. So, market genius, maybe. Pringles I've already mentioned. Then there are so many brands in which you can form an identity with. This is now a bit out of date, but it shows the groupings of different foods and different food companies and who owns them and has owned them. Coca-Cola, Nestle, PepsiCo, Kellogg's, Danone, Mars, Mondelez, etc., Cadbury's, and the different companies they own. So there are different ways in which you can go high end, go low end, go as low as you want with some of these corporations. And with some of them, like Coca-Cola, actually it's Coca-Cola Classic, it's heritage, it's all of these things. It's still fizzy water with sugar and caramel, but it becomes heritage sugar water with caramel, sugar, etc. So lots of different ways which through ultra processed foods you can create identity. Okay, environment and where is the profitability in food? Profitability in food is mostly in the inputs and in the food companies that are turning foods that go towards the retailers. So something like 15% of the profit in food comes from agricultural inputs. Farmers, oddly enough, are not way up there in terms of their profitability. It's the middle people that are really making profits out of the food industry. Given that food retailers get about 5% of the total global market in food. For some corporations, they can't get any bigger without crossing borders. So you have an element of food colonialism. So Walmart, for example, in the United States, operates in over 20 countries, Costco in over 10 countries, the Schwarz Group in Germany, over 30 countries, Kroger, only one, Aldi, etc. The more countries that a company operates in, the more profit they will have. So there's been an expansion of retailers across borders. You have Walmart, they move across to Mexico, they're selling more of American products, and therefore, almost by definition, more ultra-processed foods from the United States into Mexico, to the point where they are shifting people's habits in those places. Yeah, and supermarkets are very, very powerful in this respect. So I'm going to skip quickly to ultra-processed foods and food systems, from subsistence to commodity to brand. So there's an old slide of BP, Amoco, McDonald's, Wendy Burgers, etc., which implicitly reduces food to fuel, reduces calories in your car, calories in your stomach. You stop and you keep moving. Once you've filled your car, once you've filled your stomach. And I'm not immune to this. We were in Australia when our kids were young. And, kept picking them up from a very middle-class school and taking them to a very middle-class tennis session. The kids are saying, we're hungry, you stop at McDonald's. And then you think you've fed them, you get them back home, and they say, what's for supper? Meanwhile, they're putting fat around their waists because they're eating the wrong kinds of things. And if you go to any sort of place on a motorway, like this is the motor fuel group, Costa Coffee, Londis, Greg, Subway, Pret a Manger become the chains that you see in all of these places. Okay, I think I'm going to skip this one. I just want to talk about briefly the global food system and how it seems to be unsustainable in relation to ultra-processed foods. Have crop concentration, creating more agricultural intensification, get biodiversity loss, you get yield decline, you get reduced nutrient content, and you have a system that is spiraling towards negativity. So when we take this to the higher to a higher extreme, we can say, well, all of these things might seem local, but add them up, and they become actually very, very particular. So actually, we have a food system that is producing a surplus of these kinds of things, but these particular kinds of ultra-processed foods that corporations can generate diversity and novelty by turning out a different shape or a different color or a different flavoring. So you have intense sort of competition for producing things that have different flavors, but in fact it's a poverty because it's all masking what is not there, which is good nutrition and good quality nutrition. On top of that, okay, the Global Risks Report of the World Economic Forum, Davos, produces this report every year. Not a big fan of Davos, but they produce this risk report, which is always worth looking at. because they say for the masters of the universe, usually masters, not mistresses, not, it's who are looking at finance into the next year. They're looking at what are the things that are likely to disturb their balance into the future. So changes to Earth systems, climate change, extreme weather events, natural resource shortages, inequality, lack of economic opportunity, social, societal polarization, all of these things are linked into the food system. And, very aware that these things are influencing global finance. Okay, I'm going to diverge into two forks. The first is going to, I did this Cornell Future of Food questionnaire a few months ago when I put in what I think is likely to happen in relation to the food system, which is transformation of food systems technology and innovation through novel foods and increased productivity and efficiency of food. This is what's happening in the world. The future of food, if we take this track, is in the hands of tech, farm, supply chain, and retail. There's a great techno-determinism about looking for a technological fix to the world food problem, which is itself already a clearly well-established ecology, in which this is just the farm ecology, which is digital as well as being physical. So precision irrigation, soil sensing, pest sensing, precision applications, imaging analytics, energy systems, automation, robotics, and so on. This is what agriculture looks like in the global north. The food supply chain also is another big ecology. The food is where you have different kinds of forecasting, supply and trade analytics, product innovation, product robotics and automation, quality and safety management, freshness control, food safety, quality, manufacturing operations, etc., cold chains, and so on. This is also part of the ecology of the Western food system. You don't want to look at the detail of this, but every part of this has an element of financialization. And I'm not going to get into this, but I'll get another talk I'm preparing for Milan. We'll talk in Milan in 2 weeks' time, where I'm going to be talking about what financialization is doing to the food system. That is, global finance itself is creating new risks within this set of relationships. Okay, food tech and media landscape. All of these, at this end, smart connected food content, digital marketing, nutrition and wellness, grocery e-commerce. This is at this end where you look at your phone and say, this is the one I want to eat. You press the button, somehow it arrives, probably from a kitchen somewhere with a guy on a bike. It's going super fast and hopefully not knocking you over on the way home because they're in a hurry because they're not paid very much. All so that you can have your KFC at home, whatever it might be. Okay, I'm going to flip some slides. By Novikas, alternative worldviews are transforming power relationships in the food system. Radical change in structural and functional relational aspects of the food system give more just relationships. Transformation towards sustainable food systems, that's what I'd like. These alternative worldviews are not necessarily out of sight. They have to be a countervailing force because the trends in ultra-processed foods are saying, well, how can you stay in business? The ultra-processed foods are responding to health consciousness, reformulating UPFs by adding vitamins, fiber, probiotics. Sounds a lot like nutritionism all over again. Plant-based, ultra-processed foods, ultra-convenience in food innovation, environmental sustainability, but things you don't see the back end of these things. There may be claims over increasing sustainability, but what is being sacrificed is not sustainability. Also, algorithmic-driven recommendations, another part of this, that through deciding what you are prioritizing in terms of food, when you click on on an icon on your phone to be able to buy something, or in the supermarket with your loyalty card, so called. You are feeding algorithms that are also telling the market what they think we want. Okay, so I've got to the final slide. So in sum, ultra-processed foods are all pervasive. They have an impact on health and well-being. They've become indigenized in many places, or at least normalized. They have impact on social organization and impose new material cultures associated with those foods. They're promoted through consumption as identity. They're linked to environmental issues and economic systems. And they're part of calorie-driven, that is, unsustainable food systems, focusing on the calorie as being useful in the past, but right now it's not useful because it's creating a whole new set of problems. So finally, just my end note, which is that from Prescott, the definitions are key. Language that positions ultra-processed products as food is part of a mindset that privileges technology and continued application of isolated nutrients as a means to remedy deeply rooted socioeconomic problems related to food poverty. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much. That was so fascinating. We have time for questions if anyone has any. I can start us off. I'm also gonna look at the Zoom chat as well, but yes, if anyone wants more, it's slightly ultra processed food. It's on that table, but I guess I had a question because I've noticed that a lot of the ultra processed food I see and honestly possibly consumed today is like geared to health, whereas I feel like the perception is that it's junk food or Pringles. But what are your thoughts on sort of the high protein trend and how like there's high protein yogurt, high protein popcorn, and if it's marketed to be healthier for you?
Yeah, high protein is an interesting thing because there's really two takes on this. One is that you don't actually need that much protein.
Yeah.
That's the kind of standard narrative. It's about 3/4 gram per kilogram of body weight on average. And it's been shown across time that we can actually adapt to lower protein intakes. That's been, it's clearly known, and that's been known for a while. The other end of that is performance, that people who want to put on muscle, who want to be performance athletes, triathletes, whatever you wish, will take extra protein to get that marginal benefit of having a little bit more protein. The other end of that is also the people that benefit from that regime, also people in my age range who are in their 70s, and at some stage start to lose will start to lose muscle mass if you don't keep using your body, and so a bit more protein allows you to maintain a higher muscularity. It works for bodybuilders. It works for anybody who does gym work, and you can see its effects. But ecologically, that has a big cost because you're still using most of that protein as energy. You're not depositing all of that protein as protein in your body, as muscle in your body every day. You're converting most of that to energy because your body will turn those protein calories into just raw energy that will use for running your body. So we have the privilege of being able to choose how we run this one. Part of the whey protein story is also that milk is incredibly cheap, and milk demand has gone down dramatically. Milk's incredibly cheap because, for one reason, because dairy producers have been nailed to the floor in terms of their prices. So sometimes if you look at the cost of a bottle of water in a shop and look at the price of a bottle of milk, you see there's not much difference between the two. Farmers are not being paid for, everyday farmers are not being paid for what they're producing, which is actually very nutritious in largest point if you're not a vegetarian or a vegan. It's, it's a very good source of protein. Also, semi-skimmed milk is a very good source of electrolytes. If you're rehydrating, it's a very good source of electrolytes. Again, if you're not vegetarian or vegan, I would swear by semi-skimmed milk above an energy drink anytime. And I'm still a swimmer, so I'm still doing that. So the high protein thing is largely about what I'm doing as well, but people don't really very well informed in relation to how much protein you might need. More important is how you distribute the protein across the day. Most people have a high load of a high protein food at the end of the day. That's most usual, but you should actually spread it across the day. So if you have 3 meals a day normally, then having more protein at breakfast, more at lunchtime, less in the evening is going to make much better use of the protein that you have. But most people are not trained in physiology. And and you think, well, more of this is going to be good. Nothing can you can't show protein. That's great. But what are the ecological costs of using that protein? Let's say. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.
Are there any other?
Tell me if I'm being boring, by the way.
Okay. Do you want to start? Yeah.
I have, well, kind of follow-up questions actually. Thank you for such a fascinating paper. So many thoughts. Yeah, I've been rereading Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma, and he kind of talks about a lot of the stuff and talks about like America's national eating disorder, which as he sort of understands it is sort of eating, like the kind of detachment from food and eating lots of these very unhealthy foods, kind of, I guess, like think obesity. But a lot of the dialogue around food feels, especially with like these new sort of healthy ultra processed foods, feels really driven from like a place of fear and almost like a sort of like orthorexic mentality, like how can we be healthy, how can we like optimize perform. Thinking especially about like sort of superfoods and like adaptogenic foods that seem to be kind of everywhere in the supermarket, even when they're very dubious health benefits, and especially online. I was wondering, I guess, so sort of two slightly related questions. One is kind of what your thoughts are, the sort of place of these kind of superfoods, which are themselves highly processed, but claiming to, fill a nutritional gap without being an additive, and the kind of cultures around those, and kind of in relation to that last slide. And then the other question was about like how we can drive the conversation around food away from fear and towards like pleasure and community and taste, like all those things you touched on earlier. Thank you.
I would focus on joy. Find a neutral word. And pleasure itself can be double-edged. Whereas joy is something, finding the right word, and again, that last time definition is a key, finding the right word to have the right conversation. Why are you eating? It's a good question. I mean, at college, I always sit, if I see somebody eating on their own, I'll join them. Even if I don't know them, I say you shouldn't be eating. I think, sorry, you might not like me sitting here to hear that. And usually there's a conversation to be had, and usually from the quietest person, you can learn the most incredible things as well. So it's the quiet people. So I finished. Superfoods is, to my mind, is a marketing play. And yes, they're already processed to some degree. So some things are like extracts, like black garlic extract, whatever. You mix it in with your mayo, and suddenly it's energy charged. It's charged with everything you might want. It's still mayo with an extract from garlic that was probably extracted with alcohol, for example, and freeze dried in some way. So there are ways in which people, companies big and small, are winding their way through the legislation. A lot of it comes down to what's legislated. The legislation is always reactive. Something new comes along. You then say, well, is it harmful? Don't know. Corporation can say, look, it's here. There's no evidence that it's harmful. Of course, there isn't. Nobody's done any research. It might take 5 years, and so it's always a moving target. To my mind, the best superfoods are the ones that are, the quiet heroes, like an apple. It's just too cheap to be marketed as a superfood, and yet you look at what's in it, it's astonishing. And so many antioxidants in a very little bundle, in a small bundle. Unprocessed, it's there for you every day in Europe. So in terms of superfoods, I think that's an issue. So as a whole, niche marketing of food is big business, and so there are so many different ways of finding your market and segregating the market. Then digital marketing is where people get caught using their phones for things. They get a very good idea of your profile. Claude Fischler, who we're going to see in the lab, a sociologist of food in Paris, wrote about gastronomy when he wrote about the eating in the United States and France. There's very different ways of thinking about food. Moving away from fear also is, how do you move away from insecurities? And the insecurities around food may often be how you have been brought up to treat food and how to think about food. And I think a lot of that sort of gastronomy comes from not cooking, not getting your hands dirty. I mean, I tried out something not so long ago. I invited 4 English people for a Sunday lunch. And I said, okay, you're not going to sit there. The usual pattern is you do the cooking, they sit and eat. But I said, no, come on, we can do this together. So, okay, well, how do I do this? But very quickly it changed. Very quickly, conversations were had. People were talking, how do I do this? How do you want me to do this? Lots of conversation, lots of activity. That kind of social preparation and social cooking is, amazing for building community, building friendship, solving problems. So working out how you eat, I think, is fundamental. Patterning it for kids. My kids, we have Sunday lunch, Sunday dinner every Sunday, even if the kids are a long way away. We might have, one of them on Zoom, so she'll be there on a tablet. That's what it's about. It's about the conversation. And they've all inherited that idea. Cooking is good, they all cook. They're all in their 20s, they all cook. And they love cooking together. My daughter's fridge is a fermenter's paradise. It's how do you get to that joy? And joy actually comes spontaneously. It comes through talking. So I said it's through talking and sharing. It's not difficult. It's just have to get people to drop their defenses. Sorry, I'm gone to. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is
I'm sorry, I don't mean to malign English.
This is really interesting. I guess for context, I'm personally very critical of labeling foods as ultra processed. And it wasn't actually until your very last slide where I was like, oh, okay, I think I actually mostly agree with you. When you made the point about ultra processed foods being used as a remedy for deeply rooted socioeconomic problems, and I think that's a really poignant point. But I guess you painted a really bleak picture of the commercialization of the global food system, and I agree that's a huge problem. And in a perfect world with a perfectly just food system, everyone would have the time to bake their own bread and the money to buy their fancy olive oil. But in the meantime, what I take issue with is the demonization of foods that a lot of people depend on for one reason or another. And so I'm curious, and like this is something that I've noticed in my friend group. I'm an environmental scientist, and my friends are very concerned with what they eat. And the language that I've heard recently is, "Oh, I can't eat this the UPF," and it gets into that sort of obsessive kind of disordered territory, I think. And so I'm curious what you think about that phenomenon.
Yeah. I think I'd start by saying we need more evidence, but scientists always need more evidence about what the harms of ultra-processed foods are. I think it's indicative. I think it's solid. Looks in what there is solid. In the UK, ultra-processed foods form more than 50% of what people buy, what's on the shelf. So it's big. The production of calories for consumption, it has been traditionally in relation to offering enough food for everyday life. Very big in industrialization, for example, in the United States in the 19th century, a food system that was developed to be able to move food production from the Midwest to the Eastern Seaboard into the as cities were growing, expanding, allowed industrial growth, and that allowed economic growth, and properly fed a lot of people. So there's no doubt about that. Question is, at what point do you say enough is enough? At what point do you say we don't actually need to focus so much on calories? Can we focus on quality? How do we get quality into people's lives? And food corporations don't want to kill people, but some of them have, for example, very clear iconic brands that they wouldn't shift. I mean, talk to Coca-Cola, they would shift their classic brands. They'll have other brands, knowing full well that people will go for that classic brands. Go to McDonald's and they'll say, well, actually, we can sell you a salad, but most people go to McDonald's to buy a burger. They go buy a salad. The salad could be a token salad for showing that they sell salad. So there's that element of it, which I think is very important. That said, if you looked at this country in 1945, food was under very tight government regulation. And there's been systematic erosion of government regulation of food across maybe 7 decades. I can't speak for other countries, I don't know, but that erosion has been saying that the ecologies of food production, processing, retailing, and so on is so complex, but it kind of works. And if we try to interfere with it, I don't know what will happen. It's a complex system. So, I mean, I was part of the root and branch investigation of the Gordon Brown administration back a decade and a half ago here in the UK. So we did some very nice systems modeling and so on. And but at the end of it, they decided that while this country could reduce its food mass, do lots of good stuff, which is trying to do, we will actually avail ourselves of the global food system because it's cheaper. So it's the race towards cheapness, which is one particular issue. Well, maybe it's not the cheapness per se, but the fact that people should be brought up to be able to expect more, to be able to do more, to be able to afford more. That if you want to feed a poor family, you're really relying on ultra-processed foods. You don't have anything else. It will give you the calories, but it won't necessarily give you a very good balanced nutrition, nor will it necessarily give you the socialization around cooking and around meal preparation and eating together. So I think the social aspect of all of this is very important, because I think that ultra-processed foods individualize how people eat. And that individualization itself is a social issue. So I may well disagree with you on some of the issues, but the good thing is that there is a debate about these things, and that they're openly discussing them. On the other side is also that if people say, I can't eat this, I can't eat that, you run the risk of orthorexia. There are things you don't eat and can't eat because you are defining yourself through what you don't do as opposed to what you do. And again, it comes back to, I think, the initial comment about joy, and bringing the joy back into food could move many of these things. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but please follow up.
I think we have time for one more question, if that's okay. Do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for this talk. You've talked some about sort of the lack of state regulation, and you've really focused on like the corporate side. But I was curious if you've come across any work that's talking about how the government has actually like embedded in this happening. I'm thinking specifically of like
the military industrial complex and the creation of ultra processed foods for military rations and like humanitarian aid. If there's any work that's been done to connect those food products with commercially the commercial success of ultra processed foods.
I'm not aware of any, but that's not to say it doesn't exist. I'm certain it exists. No, I can't answer that. But that said, I would probably go away and start digging when I leave this room and find out, because there's certainly a big element of that. And there can't not be. There can't not be. Okay. Years ago, we looked at. That wasn't on.
Oh.
Is it recording?
Yes.
Can you turn it off?
I don't think I have that.
Okay. When we finish, I'll tell you.
Okay, okay, yeah,